Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Mr. Midnight. I know many of you love winding down with these stories as you drift off to sleep, and I'm so glad you're here tonight. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're listening from. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can share many more nights together. Now find a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's relax as we dive into tonight's case. Story number 1.
It was supposed to be a peaceful Thanksgiving weekend at a quiet farmhouse in Burlingame, Kansas. Instead, it turned into something out of a nightmare. On the evening of November 29, 2009, a strange call came into the sheriff's office. A neighbor had noticed an abandoned car and a man acting suspiciously, carrying something down the road before speeding away. When deputies arrived at the farmhouse, they weren't prepared for what they would find. The front door was open, and inside, the house was in chaos. Blood stained the floors, and someone's faint cries for help could be heard upstairs. Each step they took revealed something worse than the last. How did it all come to this? What could lead to such horror inside a family home? The truth is a story of control, anger, and the breaking point that changed everything. Stick around as we unravel the events of that fateful night and the years leading up to it. James Kaler appeared to have it all: a six-figure salary, a stable career, and a seemingly perfect family. His wife, Karen, embodied the quintessential stay-at-home mom, dedicating her life to raising their three children, Emily, Lauren, and Sean. To outsiders, the Kaler family represented everything a successful family was supposed to be: happy, thriving, and harmonious. But beneath the polished surface lay a web of sacrifices, compromises, and unspoken struggles that shaped their lives. Karen had dreams of her own once. She was pursuing an engineering degree when she met James, but their whirlwind romance led her to make a life-altering decision. In December 1985, the couple married, and Karen left college to support James's burgeoning career. They moved to Colorado, where James landed a promising job, and Karen embraced her role as a supportive wife, ready to build a future together. Their first major milestone arrived on April 8, 1991, when their eldest daughter, Emily, was born. Karen fully immersed herself in motherhood, while James's career flourished. But Karen's mother, Pat, observed that Karen often prioritized James's needs over her own, even in the demanding early days of parenthood. Pat worried that Karen was losing herself in the pursuit of their shared dream. By 1992, James's career prompted a move to Greenville, Texas, and in May 1993, Lauren was born. Emily and Lauren both thrived in their own ways. Emily was academically driven and musically gifted, playing drums and singing, while Lauren found her stride in sports and music, mastering the bass guitar. Life in Texas seemed idyllic, but cracks began to show. One of the first major tensions arose over expanding their family. Karen was content with 2 children, but James wanted a third. They eventually reached a compromise, drafting a formal agreement. Karen agreed to have 1 more child if James consented to a vasectomy afterward. Sean was born in March 1999, fulfilling their agreement. True to his word, James underwent the procedure, marking the end of their growing family. As James's career climbed higher, the Kalers relocated to Texas, near Dallas. Karen adapted once again, finding her place in the local community. She became the president of a moms group, built friendships, and ensured her children were active and engaged. Emily continued to excel academically and musically. Lauren thrived in band and sports, and Sean showed promise as a baseball star. On the outside, Their life looked like a dream. But James's relentless pursuit of perfection began to take its toll. He set impossibly high standards for everyone, especially his family. Lauren often bore the brunt of his criticism for not achieving straight A's like Emily. James's rigidity extended to his professional life, where colleagues found him arrogant and dismissive, especially toward women in leadership roles. His obsession with appearances and control alienated those around him. Even at home, James's need for control was evident. Despite earning $180,000 a year, he tightly managed the family's finances. Karen received a strict weekly allowance and was required to keep every receipt from her shopping trips. James's frugality was well known. He borrowed tools instead of buying them and even relied on co-workers to pay for his entertainment at strip clubs. Every evening at 8:30 p.m., Karen was expected to be in bed for what James deemed their routine. Any deviation from this expectation was met with anger or worse. Friends noticed how Karen whispered during late phone calls, apologizing and rushing to end conversations to avoid James's wrath. Even illness didn't exempt her from these demands. Defiance was risky, as James's anger could escalate to physical violence. For Karen, compliance often felt like the only safe choice. It hadn't always been this way. Early in their relationship, James's control was less overt, but it steadily grew more suffocating over the years. At one point, he suggested bringing another woman into their relationship, claiming it was to spice things up. Karen was deeply uncomfortable with the idea but struggled to say no. Desperate for an outlet and some independence, Karen secretly joined a gym. Fitness had always been a passion, and the gym became her sanctuary. James refused to pay for a membership, so Karen baked cakes and took odd jobs to afford it. By January 2006, she had saved enough to join Powerhouse Gym, where she quickly became a regular. Her dedication paid off. She eventually secured a part-time job as a personal trainer. James surprisingly allowed it with one condition. She had to be home before the kids returned from school. Karen excelled in her role and made new friends, but her gym community also became an outlet for venting about her crumbling marriage. At the gym, Karen opened up about the constant arguments, James's anger, and the growing tension at home. The fights often turned physical, leaving Karen with bruises that she tried to hide. Her unhappiness was no secret to those around her. It was at this point that Karen met Sonny, a fellow trainer who was calm, understanding, and a stark contrast to James. Sonny became Karen's confidant, and over time, their bond deepened into a romantic relationship. Speculation surrounded how Karen and Sonny's relationship began. Some believe James's earlier suggestion of involving a third person had set the stage, while others thought the affair had started organically, without James's knowledge. Regardless, their relationship eventually became public, evolving into a threesome. James even encouraged the connection, sending Sonny flirty messages, buying gifts for both women, and supporting their weekend getaways. Yet he later denied any role in fostering the relationship, framing Karen as the one destroying their marriage. In 2008, James found a way to reassert control. He accepted a higher-paying job in Columbia, Missouri, forcing Karen to leave her life and Sonny behind. Karen was heartbroken. Her kids were deeply involved in their activities, and she had built strong community ties in Weatherford. But as always, James's decisions overruled hers. He moved ahead, leaving Karen to wrap up their life in Texas. Unbeknownst to him, Karen and Sonny decided to maintain their relationship long distance. When Karen and the kids joined James in Missouri, he believed their marriage had been fixed. He even allowed Karen to enroll at the University of Missouri and pursue a health sciences degree while continuing her work as a fitness instructor. But Karen, having tasted freedom with Sonny, wasn't content to return to her old life. She craved independence, and James's obsessive need for control only intensified. He began monitoring her every move, emails, phone calls, and even her whereabouts. The tension reached a breaking point on New Year's Eve 2008 during a party back in Weatherford. Neither James nor Karen expected Sonny to attend, but there she was. Karen's joy at seeing Sonny was unmistakable. They laughed, hugged, and shared drinks in a way that made it clear their bond was far from over. To James, it was a public humiliation, a direct challenge to his authority. His anger boiled over as he realized his grip on Karen was slipping, and the illusion of his perfect family was unraveling before his eyes. James, unable to contain his anger, confronted Karen in front of everyone, shouting accusations of infidelity. Karen, refusing to back down, kissed Sonny in full view of the guests. The spectacle shocked the room, and the host, uncomfortable with the escalating drama, asked them to leave. The fight spilled out onto the front lawn, where James's anger turned physical. He shoved Karen, causing her to fall and hit her head on the ground. By the next morning, the fallout was undeniable. Karen, reflecting on the chaos, began questioning the way she had been challenging James. She told Sonny they needed to take a break, but Sonny adamantly disagreed, pointing out that the real issue was James's abusive behavior. Concerned for Karen's safety, Sonny encouraged her to make a change. In January 2009, Karen finally took a stand and filed for divorce. Though she continued living in the house, she moved into a separate bedroom and maintained her long-distance relationship with Sonny. James, however, refused to let go. He obsessively monitored Karen's emails, tracked her movements, and even intercepted greeting cards from Sonny. Each time Karen made plans with Sonny, James would find a way to interfere, his jealousy pushing him further into irrational behavior. At work, James's colleagues began noticing his unraveling. He would carry around a photo album of his family, showing it off to anyone who would listen and lamenting, "Why doesn't Karen want this perfect family?" His erratic behavior made everyone uncomfortable, but James was too consumed by his obsession to notice. In March 2009, tensions reached a breaking point. After a city council meeting where James gave a speech, he and Karen got into another heated argument. This time, James's anger turned violent. He physically blocked Karen from leaving, cornering her against a cabinet, and assaulted her. Karen called the police, and James was arrested for third-degree domestic assault. In her police statement, Karen detailed James's increasingly violent and controlling behavior, while he dismissed the incident as a misunderstanding, claiming he was only trying to give her a hug. The bruises on Karen's body told a different story. Karen moved out shortly after, taking the kids with her. She withdrew $50,000 from their joint account and rented a home on the other side of Columbia, signaling her determination to break free from James's grip. For James, the arrest was catastrophic. As a public figure, his actions made headlines, and his colleagues became increasingly vocal about his bizarre behavior. Unable to salvage his reputation, James was forced to resign under the guise of family issues. In reality, his firing was inevitable. With his career in shambles and his family gone, James retreated to his parents' farm in Kansas, hoping hard work would bring clarity. Instead, the isolation only deepened his obsession. He fixated on Karen, unable to understand why she had left him. In his mind, he had been the perfect provider and husband. He refused to acknowledge that his controlling and abusive behavior had driven her away. James's obsession soon turned toxic. He began stalking Karen, reading her texts, emails, and even private cards from Sonny. He hurled homophobic slurs at both women, despite having encouraged Karen's relationship with Sonny in the past when it suited him. His anger only escalated when his daughters started distancing themselves from him. Emily, his eldest, defied James by choosing a college he didn't approve of, which he saw as a personal betrayal. When one of his daughters posted on Facebook about her bisexuality, James lashed out, blaming Karen for corrupting their children. Desperate to regain control, James built an extensive case against Karen, compiling over 3,500 pages of so-called evidence for his divorce attorney. The files included screenshots of Karen's private messages, detailed notes on her visits to Sonny, and baseless claims that the women had acted inappropriately in front of the kids. Despite his efforts, the accusations were never substantiated, and his fixation only further isolated him from the life he once controlled so tightly. James's behavior had grown increasingly erratic and dangerous. He confided in friends about wanting to harm Sonny, though no one took him seriously. Despite his rage toward Karen and Sonny, he was engaging in multiple affairs, further highlighting his instability and self-contradiction. Amid this chaos, James seemed to maintain one stable relationship, his bond with his son, Sean. Unlike his estranged relationships with Karen and his daughters, James made an effort to stay connected with Sean. They spent time hunting and fishing together, and James clung to this relationship as the last thread of his crumbling family life. Sean represented a glimmer of hope for James, a connection that hadn't yet been severed. By Thanksgiving 2009, tensions were high. Karen, trying to hold on to what remained of her family, planned a visit to her grandmother Dorothy's farmhouse in Burlingame, Kansas, with her children and Sonny. On the day after Thanksgiving, Karen went to pick up Sean from James's house to join the family gathering. Dorothy, at 89 years old, lived in a small, quiet town of fewer than 1,000 residents. The visit was meant to be a peaceful holiday reunion, but it would end in unimaginable horror. On the evening of November 29, 2009, a neighbor in Burlingame reported a suspicious vehicle speeding through the area. They watched as the driver, a man, parked, exited the truck, and walked down the road carrying a large object. Moments later, he returned, placed the object in the truck's back seat, and sped off. Concerned, the neighbors called the sheriff's office, suspecting a robbery. What followed was far darker than anyone could have anticipated. When deputies arrived at Dorothy's home to investigate, they were met with a scene of devastation. Dorothy was found in the kitchen, bleeding heavily from multiple gunshot wounds. Though alive, she was barely clinging to life. In the dining room lay Karen, shot twice and already deceased. In the lounge, 18-year-old Emily was discovered behind the couch, also shot twice. The second shot had paralyzed her instantly, and she had died on the scene. A faint voice from upstairs alerted deputies to another victim. 16-year-old Lauren was alive but gravely injured. She had been shot multiple times and was struggling to hold on. As paramedics worked to stabilize her, Lauren whispered a chilling revelation. "James, my dad." Her injuries were too severe, and despite efforts to save her, Lauren succumbed shortly after. Dorothy, too, passed away, leaving Sean as the only survivor of the massacre. Sean later recounted the events of that horrific night. He and Karen had been sitting together, cleaning old coins when James burst through the back door with a rifle. Without hesitation, he opened fire, killing Karen first. Sean's desperate attempt to call for help that night was interrupted by the sound of more gunshots echoing through the house. Overcome with terror, he knew he had to escape. He fled through the chaos, sprinting to a neighbor's house to find safety. Authorities quickly issued a search warrant for James, and it wasn't long before they located his car, abandoned in a remote area where it seemed eerily out of place. Inside the vehicle, officers discovered an unsettling scene. There was a stash of ammunition, unopened bottles of anxiety medication, and a backpack filled with essentials like soap, toilet paper, and canned food. It was clear James had been preparing for something, but James himself was nowhere to be found. Hours later, he was spotted wandering along a desolate road, looking disheveled and lost. When the officers approached, he didn't resist. Instead, he muttered, "I'm the guy you're looking for," and surrendered without incident. James's defense argued that his deteriorating mental health, including depression and personality disorders, had pushed him to the breaking point. They claimed he had snapped and was not in control of his actions. The prosecution, however, presented a different narrative, one of premeditation and calculated intent. Their key evidence included testimony from James's psychiatrist, who confirmed that while James did suffer from mental health issues, he retained the ability to plan his actions. The fact that he had spared Sean's life underscored the intentional nature of his crimes. 2 years later, in 2011, the trial began. Sean, now 12 years old, displayed extraordinary courage as he took the stand to recount the harrowing events of that night. With heartbreaking clarity, he described how his father had burst into the home and opened fire, killing his mother and sisters. His testimony painted a vivid picture of calculated violence, leaving no doubt about James's intent. Sonny also testified, sharing details about Karen's abusive relationship with James. She explained how James's demeanor had shifted drastically after Karen decided to leave him, transforming from indifferent to hostile. Though Sonny's testimony relied on her memories and Karen's accounts, it offered valuable insight into the toxic dynamics leading up to the tragedy. After only 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict. James was guilty of capital murder. His insanity defense was rejected, and he faced the ultimate penalty, death. As the sentence was read, James remained emotionless. He even requested to leave the courtroom during the victim impact statements but was ordered to stay. Sean's statement during the sentencing was perhaps the most poignant moment of the trial. With remarkable strength, he said, "I do not want my dad to receive the death penalty because it would be hard on my grandparents. I do not want my whole family gone." Despite everything James had done, Sean still saw him as a father and struggled with the prospect of losing him too. James, however, showed no remorse. After his sentencing, he began writing letters, not to apologize but to justify his actions. He claimed he had freed Sean from what he described as a toxic environment, revealing his lack of accountability and twisted perception of his crimes. James's legal team quickly filed an appeal, arguing that the jury was biased and that his mental health hadn't been properly considered. The Kansas Supreme Court disagreed, affirming that James's mental health had been evaluated during sentencing but did not excuse his actions. His appeal was denied, leaving James on death row, a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of his choices. For Sean, life after the tragedy was a testament to resilience. Despite enduring unimaginable loss and trauma, he graduated from high school and built a life for himself in Kansas. His journey stands as a beacon of strength and hope, a reminder that even in the face of profound darkness, it is possible to rise above and find a path forward. James's crimes left a permanent scar, but Sean's perseverance is a powerful testament to human endurance.
Story number 2.
On the morning of August 18, 1993, everything seemed normal at an apartment complex in Mission Viejo, California. But behind one door, something unthinkable had happened. Jim Peng, a successful businessman, had just returned from a business trip and decided to visit his mistress, Jennifer, and their baby boy, Kevin. When no one answered the door, he didn't think much of it at first. But when he finally stepped inside, what he saw changed everything. The scene he walked into wasn't just shocking, it was devastating. It would set off a chain of events that exposed secrets, lies, and a tragedy no one could have imagined. What really happened in that apartment? And who could have done something so terrible? As the investigation unfolded, the truth turned out to be more complicated than anyone expected. Lisa Peng was a woman born in Taiwan in the early 1950s. Lisa was described as a determined and hard-working young woman, and her life took a significant turn in 1967 when she met Jim Peng. Jim, born in Taiwan in 1945, was her supervisor at a Taiwanese financial firm. The two quickly formed a connection, and after nearly 5 years of courtship, they married. Around 1973, the couple welcomed their first child, a daughter, and 4 years later, they were blessed with a son. Although Lisa's career before marriage is unclear, some reports suggest she left her professional life behind to focus on raising her children and managing their household. She also supported Jim in building his business, which started as a modest company but eventually grew into a multi-million-dollar international electronics enterprise. Jim's company, which sold radio systems to police organizations across Asia and other regions, amassed significant wealth in both mainland China and Taiwan. By the 1980s and 1990s, his net worth was estimated at $200 million, the equivalent of nearly $500 million today. The Peng family lived a life of luxury, enjoying the privileges that came with their financial success. To expand his business ventures, Jim relocated the family to Orange County, California, settling in a beautiful home in Rancho Santa Margarita. Despite this move, his company's main operations remained in Asia, and Jim frequently traveled to Taiwan and China for business. By 1992, after more than 2 decades of marriage, Lisa and Jim were seen as a highly successful couple. Their teenage children attended private schools, and the family appeared to have reached the pinnacle of prosperity. However, during one of his many business trips to Asia, Jim's life took a new direction. While staying at a luxurious hotel where he often held meetings and attended investment events, he met a young, strikingly beautiful woman named Jennifer. Born in 1968 in a coastal region of China, Jennifer was an elegant, tall, and educated woman working in public relations at the hotel. Her family background remains mostly private, with only the names of her father, Shi Suo Shuang, and one sister, Jacqueline Shi, known. During a hotel event, Jennifer inadvertently blocked Jim's view. When he politely asked her to move, the brief interaction led to an introduction. Jennifer, recognizing the distinguished businessman, offered her assistance. This small exchange captivated Jim, who was 49 at the time, and he soon fell in love with the 24-year-old Jennifer. Despite the significant age gap, Jim and Jennifer began a romantic relationship. Upon returning home to his wife and children in California, Jim continued to see Jennifer during his trips to Asia. About a year after their initial meeting, he arranged for Jennifer to move to California and settled her in an apartment in Mission Viejo, conveniently close to his family home. Their relationship evolved into a more stable and consistent arrangement, with Jim leading a double life and dividing his time between his family and Jennifer. Jim's infatuation with Jennifer quickly escalated, disrupting the delicate balance of his double life. Deeply in love with her, Jim sought every opportunity to be near Jennifer. To make this possible, he hired her as a personal assistant or a staff member at his company, ensuring she was constantly by his side. Jim's level of commitment went beyond providing her with an apartment and covering all her expenses. He even granted her a third of the shares in one of his subsidiary companies. Despite these gestures, Jennifer grew dissatisfied with being the other woman and began pressuring Jim to divorce Lisa and make their relationship official. This marked the beginning of significant tensions. Jim, a traditional man, viewed divorce as a cultural taboo that conflicted with his deep-rooted Chinese values. Beyond tradition, the financial implications loomed large. A divorce could potentially leave Lisa with half his fortune or more, including substantial alimony for their children. Though Lisa initially appeared unaware of her husband's affair, subtle changes in Jim's behavior raised suspicions. After his business trips, Lisa began finding women's clothing among his belongings, sometimes in his suitcase, other times in his gym bag. When confronted, Jim brushed off her concerns, claiming the clothes belonged to a colleague who must have mistakenly placed them there. While unconvinced, Lisa chose to ignore the issue for a time. However, as the months passed, the pattern persisted. More clothing appeared, and Lisa became convinced that Jim was unfaithful, likely with someone from his office. Reports suggest Lisa discreetly spoke with company employees to confirm her suspicions. Eventually, she uncovered the truth and one day visited Jim's workplace, where she met Jennifer in person. The encounter left Lisa devastated. Jennifer was strikingly beautiful and significantly younger than her. Despite the shock, Lisa attempted to reason with Jennifer, asking her to end the relationship. Jennifer, however, refused, declaring her love for Jim and her unwillingness to leave him. Feeling powerless, Lisa watched as the situation worsened over time. Reports claim that after their confrontation, Jennifer began leaving her clothing intentionally at the Pang family home, an act that infuriated Lisa. In one instance, Lisa cut Jennifer's clothes into pieces with scissors and confronted Jim, demanding he end the affair. She even threatened to harm Jennifer if the relationship continued. Jim, however, remained indifferent to her anger. Another turning point came when Lisa devised a plan to catch them in the act. While visiting her family in Taiwan, she returned home earlier than expected without informing Jim. Upon arrival, she discovered women's lingerie on her own bed. Shortly afterward, Jim and Jennifer entered the house together, clearly comfortable and prepared to settle in. When Lisa confronted them, Jennifer coldly responded that, as far as she understood, the house wouldn't be Lisa's for much longer. Lisa had hoped for remorse or shame from Jennifer, but found none. Instead, the confrontation escalated into a physical altercation between the two women. Jim remained passive, refusing to intervene. When Lisa demanded he end the affair and fire Jennifer, he refused once again. Despite the chaos, Jim continued to reject the idea of divorce or moving out, leaving Lisa trapped in an increasingly unbearable situation. The situation reached its peak in March 1993, when Jennifer gave birth to a son, Kevin Pong. The news of the birth marked a breaking point for Lisa, as it symbolized the ultimate betrayal. How and when Lisa learned about the child remains unclear, but Kevin's arrival irrevocably altered the dynamic, solidifying Jennifer's presence in Jim's life and leaving Lisa to grapple with a deep sense of betrayal. Jim had already proven that Jennifer wasn't just a fleeting affair, and this deeply wounded Lisa. But she never imagined he would go as far as having a child with another woman. This revelation was too much for Lisa to bear, and she decided that confronting them wasn't enough. She needed to take decisive action to end the situation. On August 18, 1993, Jim returned from a business trip and decided to visit Jennifer and their 5-month-old son, Kevin. When he rang the doorbell of her apartment, no one answered. Assuming they might have gone out for a walk, he waited for a few hours at the building manager's office before returning. Once again, there was no response. Acting on instinct, he turned the doorknob and was startled to find it unlocked, a rare occurrence as Jennifer always locked the door. Stepping into the apartment, Jim was met with a horrifying scene. Jennifer's lifeless body lay face down on the couch, covered in blood. Panicked, he immediately called the police. When officers arrived, Jim explained that he hadn't dared to go beyond the living room and that the silence in the apartment made him fear the worst for his son. The officers began their search and, tragically, found Kevin's lifeless body in one of the bedrooms. A blanket had been placed over his face, leading investigators to believe he had been suffocated. Despite being devastated, Jim cooperated with the police, explaining that Jennifer was his mistress and Kevin was their son. He also disclosed that he had come directly to the apartment after flying in from Taiwan. As investigators processed the scene, Jennifer and Kevin's bodies were sent to the Orange County Coroner's Office for autopsies. Forensic experts found no signs of forced entry, leading them to believe Jennifer had willingly opened the door to her attacker. Soon, detectives discovered Jim's double life, a devoted husband of over 20 years with 2 teenage children, who was also the father of Jennifer's child. Jim's connection to the victims and the fact that he was the one who discovered the bodies made him the prime suspect. However, Jim passed a polygraph test and provided evidence confirming his alibi. He had been traveling until the day he found the bodies. This eliminated him as a suspect. The autopsy results revealed Jennifer had suffered 18 stab wounds, while Kevin had been smothered with a blanket. Additionally, investigators found a bite mark on Jennifer's arm. Saliva from the mark was sent to a lab for DNA analysis. Given the brutal nature of the attack, authorities suspected it was a crime of passion and turned their attention to Lisa, the third person in the love triangle. At the time, Lisa was in Taiwan, but Jim, cooperating with authorities, persuaded her to return to the United States to provide a statement. In January 1994, Lisa arrived at the Orange County Sheriff's Office, where she was interrogated for nearly 9 hours. She denied any involvement in the murders but was required to provide a DNA sample. When the results came back, they revealed a perfect match with the saliva from the bite mark on Jennifer's arm. Despite this, Lisa continued to deny her guilt. In an unexpected twist, Jim expressed guilt over the situation and stood by Lisa, offering his support. However, when police requested he speak to her privately, he agreed. The couple had a conversation in one of the interrogation rooms, unaware it was being recorded. Speaking in Mandarin, Lisa reportedly told Jim that what happened was the result of his infidelity. When Jim asked her directly why she had killed Jennifer, Lisa admitted to going to the apartment to confront her, which escalated into a heated argument. She claimed Jennifer fell onto a sharp object during the fight and maintained it was self-defense. Regarding Kevin, it is believed Lisa couldn't bear the thought of the child as a reminder of Jim's betrayal. Police interpreted Lisa's statements during the conversation as a confession and arrested her for the double homicide. The Asian community in Orange County and those familiar with the scandalous affair were divided in their reactions. Some sympathized with Lisa, believing she was pushed to her breaking point by the betrayal and humiliation. Others viewed her as the perpetrator of an unthinkable act, leaving a community in shock over the tragic end of a love triangle spiraling out of control. Some Taiwanese women showed their solidarity with Lisa Peng by attending her first court hearing, carrying yellow flowers and signs of support. While the case received standard media coverage in the United States, it became front-page news in Asia, particularly in Taiwan and China. Reporters from those regions portrayed Lisa as a betrayed and abandoned wife, while Jennifer was often depicted as a gold digger, intent on advancing her relationship with a wealthy lover to enjoy a lavish lifestyle in the U.S. The media frenzy in Asia was so intense that the case was compared to the O.J. Simpson trial, with its mix of jealousy, violence, two victims, and significant DNA evidence. After giving his initial statement, Jim returned to Taiwan and chose to remain there throughout the trial, refusing to testify against his wife. Speculation arose that guilt over indirectly causing the tragedy drove his decision. Lisa's defense team shifted the blame onto Jim, suggesting he might have attacked Jennifer and Kevin upon his return. However, the investigation conclusively ruled him out. In 1995, 2 years after the murders, Lisa's first trial began. The jury struggled to reach a verdict, and the trial ended in a mistrial. By the time of her second trial in 1996, the case had attracted even more public attention. The judge presiding over the trial reportedly received over 400 letters, many pleading for leniency. Among them was a letter from Jim, as well as one from Lisa herself, in which she described herself as a poor, unfortunate woman abandoned by God. Ultimately, the jury found Lisa Peng, then 46, guilty of first-degree murder in the deaths of Jennifer and her 5-month-old son, Kevin Peng. During the sentencing hearing, family members of the victims gave emotional impact statements. Through an interpreter, Jennifer's father called the crime heinous and unforgivable, and lamented that Lisa had shown no mercy, not even to an innocent infant. Jennifer's sister, who flew in from China, also spoke tearfully about the profound grief her family endured. She expressed relief that Lisa would spend the rest of her life in prison, calling it the only appropriate punishment for such a crime. Lisa was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Her defense team immediately announced plans to appeal the verdict. 3 years later, the case took a dramatic turn. On September 30th, 1999, an appeals court overturned Lisa's 1996 conviction, citing constitutional violations. The court found that Lisa had not been informed of her Miranda rights during her arrest, was misled into speaking with her husband in what she thought was a private conversation that was secretly recorded, and was denied legal counsel during her interrogation. In January 2000, the California Supreme Court upheld the appeals court's decision, granting Lisa a new trial. The announcement of a retrial reignited public debate. Media outlets and Lisa's supporters continued to call for a reduced sentence, arguing that she had been pushed to her breaking point by Jim's betrayal. Reports suggested that on August 18, 1993, the pain of her husband's infidelity had driven Lisa to confront Jennifer, leading to an argument that spiraled out of control. Amid growing concerns that the jury might once again struggle to reach a verdict, the prosecution decided to offer Lisa Peng a plea deal. Under the agreement, she would plead guilty to 2 lesser charges in exchange for a significantly reduced sentence. The terms included an 11-year prison sentence, after which she would be deported to Taiwan with a lifetime ban from returning to the United States. On June 29, 2001, Lisa Peng, then 51 years old, accepted the deal and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of voluntary manslaughter. The judge sentenced her to 2 concurrent 11-year terms, with credit for time served since her arrest. Just 6 months later, Lisa was granted parole. Upon her release from prison, she was immediately placed into the custody of U.S. immigration authorities for deportation. On July 1, 2001, Lisa arrived at Taipei Airport in Taiwan, where agents from the Criminal Investigation Bureau awaited her. After several hours of questioning, she was released. Despite being tried 3 times and convicted in the United States for the killings of Jennifer and her infant son, Kevin Peng, Lisa faced potential prosecution in Taiwan. According to Taiwanese law, citizens convicted of serious crimes abroad can be retried upon returning to their homeland. However, as of November 2024, no records indicate that Lisa was ever prosecuted in Taiwan. Lisa Peng disappeared from the public eye after her release. Her current whereabouts remain unknown and no information has surfaced about her children. By November 2024, it was presumed that, if still alive, Lisa would be around 74 years old, likely living a quiet, anonymous life in Taiwan. As for Jim, the tragedy marked the beginning of a steep personal and professional decline. He publicly admitted that the events had cost him everything. The scandal, which dominated headlines for years in the United States, Taiwan, and China, turned the Asian community against him, with many blaming him for the circumstances that led to the tragic deaths of Jennifer and Kevin. Although he was never implicated in the crime, the role he played in the events leading up to it left a lasting stain on his reputation. In 1997, Jim faced additional legal trouble when his company was sued in a U.S. court for allegedly importing radio equipment illegally. Under the pressure of the case, a plea agreement was reached, and while the charges against Jim personally were dropped, his U.S.-based corporation pleaded guilty. The company's Shanghai division was ordered to pay $990,000 in penalties. Jim was also sued by Jennifer's parents, who sought $2 million in damages. They argued that Jim had been aware of the escalating conflict between the two women and had a duty to provide protection for Jennifer and Kevin. The outcome of this lawsuit remains unclear. The case of Lisa Peng had all the hallmarks of a real-life dark drama: infidelity, betrayal, wealth, greed, jealousy, and vengeance. Nearly 2 decades later, it continues to spark debates about justice, morality, and the limits of human emotion. While many condemned Lisa for her unforgivable acts, others sympathized with her, believing she was driven to the edge by the heartbreak and humiliation inflicted upon her. Her story remains a haunting reminder of the devastating consequences of betrayal and unchecked passions.
Story number 3.
It started as a simple trip to the store. A mother, her 3 daughters, and a man they had just met, offering help, kindness, and a ride to Walmart. They were looking for a dress. Tomorrow, her daughter would fly across the country to see her father. Tonight was about making her feel special. But as the fluorescent lights dimmed and the store neared closing, something shifted. The man who had promised to help offered to buy the girls a meal. One child followed him, and then, just like that, she was gone. The cameras kept rolling, the aisles were still busy, but a quiet horror had already begun to unfold. And by the time anyone realized what had happened, it was too late. This is the case of Cherish Periwinkle. 8-year-old Cherish Lily Periwinkle lived with her mother Rain and 2 younger sisters, Destiny and Nevaeh. She was born on Christmas Eve in Orlando, a day her mother would always describe as the greatest gift life ever gave her. After her parents, Rain and Billy, separated, custody struggles would follow over the years, but to those who knew Cherish, she was a light in the middle of it all. Cherish was full of life. She adored animals, loved drawing, and spent hours pretending to be a teacher to her sisters. She had just learned how to ride her bike and was always zipping around outside, smiling and carefree. Her dad once said she was the definition of pure love. On the evening of June 21st, Rain took Cherish and her 2 sisters to a Dollar General store. They were shopping for some inexpensive clothes, hoping to find a dress for Cherish to wear the next morning. She was flying out to visit her dad in California. Times were hard. Rain didn't have much money, and while she quietly expressed her worries to a store employee, someone else was listening. A man who had been lingering nearby saw the family's vulnerability and saw an opportunity. He approached them in the parking lot. His name was Donald Smith. He said he and his wife had a $150 Walmart gift card and wanted to help the family. Rain was hesitant at first, but Donald spoke softly, warmly. He said he had children too. He seemed genuine, almost fatherly. He looked her in the eyes and said she was safe. And so, in that moment of trust, Rain and her girls got into his van. He drove them to a Walmart store. For over an hour, they browsed the aisles. Rain and her daughters picked out clothes while Donald lingered nearby, watching them. According to Rain, he didn't shop for much, except for one unsettling item: a length of rope. As the evening stretched on, the girls grew hungry and restless. Rain was ready to leave, but Donald insisted they grab a bite from the McDonald's inside the store. He gestured toward the front of the building and offered to take Cherish to order food while Rain stayed with the younger girls. It was nearly closing time. The McDonald's inside Walmart had already shut down, but Cherish, excited for a treat, skipped off behind him. It would be the last time Rain saw her daughter alive. As the store neared closing, panic set in. Rain searched frantically. No sign of Cherish. No sign of Donald. Her phone wasn't working. She screamed for help. It took nearly 40 minutes before a store employee offered her a phone to call 911. Despite everything Rain reported, police initially treated the case as a missing child, not an abduction. Hours passed, but security footage made it clear. Cameras showed Donald leaving the store with Cherish, walking calmly to his white van and driving away. An alert was issued just before midnight. The vehicle was described as a white Dodge van with white curtains. By 3:30 a.m., the name Donald Smith surfaced. He was a convicted offender, recently released from prison, just 3 weeks prior. He had a long, disturbing history dating back to 1977. And now, the urgency was clear. Homicide detectives were called in. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement issued an official Amber Alert at 4 a.m. At sunrise, a tip came in. A suspicious white van had been spotted behind a church. When officers found it, Donald was alone, soaking wet. Inside were items from Walmart. K-9 units were deployed. A police officer took one look at Donald and immediately knew they needed to search nearby water. Something wasn't right. Just 20 minutes later, behind the church where the van had been seen, they found her. Cherish's body lay near a creek, her small figure partially submerged. Her hair floated in the water, and her bright floral dress was nearby. She had been brutally assaulted and murdered. Donald was arrested and brought in for questioning. He showed no emotion, no remorse. He didn't speak. He refused to answer questions. His past was filled with crimes against children, assaults, attempted kidnappings, manipulations. He had been recommended for civil commitment, meaning he was deemed too dangerous to be released. But somehow, he had slipped through the cracks. And in that gap, Cherish had paid the price. Daniel Montfaldi, the administrator of the Violent Predator Program, knew what the law required. Identify and treat that small, dangerous group of predators likely to offend again. Donald Smith was one of them. He had been flagged as a serious threat as early as 1999, just as he was finishing another prison sentence. Both state officials and psychiatric evaluators believed he was a high risk. Their message was clear: this man was not safe to release. Donald was sent to a civil commitment facility near Tampa, but somewhere in the process, the system failed. A jury never saw those warnings. He was let go. And in the years that followed, Smith continued to target young girls. The risk, it turned out, wasn't theoretical. In 2009, he impersonated a state social worker in an attempt to gain access to a child named Christina. He even made obscene phone calls to her at just 10 years old. He was charged, pled guilty to misdemeanor offenses, and served a short sentence, 14 months. It wasn't a felony, so he was never reevaluated as a threat. His file remained open, but no red flags were strong enough to stop him. Christina's mother, Stephanie, never forgot him. She called him sick, evil, someone who should never walk free. And when Cherish was killed just 3 weeks after Donald's release, the outrage was impossible to ignore. His criminal history was 19 pages long. Former prosecutor Rick Alexander said what so many in law enforcement already knew. This man had never stopped. His record wasn't one of reformation. It was a long, uninterrupted pattern. And yet somehow, despite all the warnings, he kept slipping through. And then came the autopsy. The truth about what Cherish endured was more horrifying than anyone could imagine. She had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. She had been gagged. She had been strangled so severely that her eyes bled. The pain was unimaginable. The cruelty was deliberate. When Rain learned the details, she collapsed. An ambulance was called to help her. Donald Smith was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and assault of a child under 12. As the case moved forward, the entire city of Jacksonville felt the weight of it. Hundreds attended Cherish's funeral. Strangers delivered groceries to the Periwinkle home. Nearly 2,000 people signed her guest book. Her story had touched the hearts of people who had never met her, but now mourned her deeply. For Rain, the pain was not only personal, but public. She believed she had been deceived by a man pretending to help her family. She said she saw him as a kind stranger, a good Samaritan. That trust had been exploited in the worst way. But the nightmare didn't end there. Weeks after the funeral, the state removed Rain's 2 youngest daughters, Destiny and Nevaeh, from the home she shared with her partner Aaron. The Department of Children and Families launched an investigation into the girls' living situation. Suddenly, Rain found herself not only grieving her daughter, but fighting for custody of her remaining children. A judge ordered Rain to submit to a drug test. She complied. Her visitation was initially revoked, but later restored. For 2 hours every Monday, Rain was allowed to see her girls under supervision. Still, the fear of losing them permanently hung over her. Aaron Pearson, Destiny and Nevaeh's father, was determined to regain custody. He expressed his love for the girls publicly, saying he'd do anything to protect them. He understood the system needed assurance before reunification could happen. He promised that if he regained custody, he would never keep the children from their mother. But others had different plans. A social worker named Amy Deckershome offered her home as a temporary placement for the girls. Soon, she began helping manage a Facebook page advocating for the girls to be adopted. Rain felt betrayed. Amy had once been a friend. Amy claimed otherwise, insisting she had not worked with Rain in years. Still, the tension between them grew. Even Cherish's older sister Lindsay, who had moved to Australia, joined the fight. She hadn't spoken to her mother in years, but she wanted custody of the girls too. The situation became more tangled by the day. Everyone had their version of the truth. Everyone believed they were acting in the girls' best interest. Meanwhile, in jail, Donald Smith remained silent with law enforcement, but behind closed doors, his mouth never stopped. In a secretly recorded conversation with his mother, he denied everything. He said Walmart had too many cameras for someone to do what they said he had done. He rambled. He contradicted himself. He shifted blame. At times, he claimed Cherish wouldn't leave him alone. He even tried to say he wasn't attracted to children, but the truth kept slipping through. He admitted he had been high and drunk the night he met Rain. He described the chaos inside the van. He claimed he panicked when Cherish followed him. Then, he made a chilling admission. He believed the only way out was to kill her. Donald struggled to control the narrative. At times, he sounded like a man unraveling. "I'll never be okay," he said, in one of many recordings. He rambled about humiliation, about the voices in his head. He spoke as if his secrets would die with him, like a man trapped by his own guilt, or pretending to be. He told his mother he needed a simple book on psychiatric disorders. He believed his only way out was to go down the mental health route, a calculated path through the court system rather than one of genuine remorse. But then came more damning evidence. In two separate recordings, secretly captured conversations with fellow inmates revealed the truth about who Donald really was. He didn't just talk about young girls. He joked, described them in disturbing detail, referenced their ages with casual cruelty. The mask had slipped completely. These weren't the words of a man pleading insanity. They were the words of a predator, fully aware of his appetites. Donald pleaded not guilty. His defense team tried to argue that media coverage had poisoned the public against him, portraying him as a monster. They filed a motion to move the trial to a new location. It was denied. While the years dragged on, Donald's trial remained in limbo. Legal challenges surrounding Florida's death penalty law created delay after delay. Meanwhile, Rain Periwinkle's personal life continued to fall apart. In 2017, the state announced that Rain had failed to meet the requirements needed to regain custody of her surviving daughters, Destiny and Nevaeh. They were officially put up for adoption and relocated to Australia, placed with their aunt. The girls now lived a world away, starting over with new guardians and a new name. For Rain, this was another unbearable blow. She insisted she had been fighting for her girls, but said she had been shut out of the process. She accused the system of taking them from her unfairly. Rain believed her sister had married only to gain custody, and she hadn't spoken to her in years. The state claimed Rain had been given a chance to prove herself, but failed to follow through. The last time she saw Destiny and Nevaeh was during a brief supervised visitation in March. She told them she'd keep fighting, and she did. Billy, Cherish's father, had long since parted ways with Rain. Their relationship had been complicated and filled with custody battles. After Cherish's death, he chose not to take legal action against Rain, even though his attorney stated he personally believed Rain bore some responsibility. Billy said he just wanted to move forward as best he could. Rain, meanwhile, struggled to maintain employment. Her name had become associated with tragedy. She said employers turned her away because they blamed her for what happened. And in the shadows of her public grief, she battled depression and isolation. But in early 2018, the courtroom doors finally opened. Donald Smith stood trial for the murder of Cherish Periwinkle. The world watched. The prosecution began with raw, brutal truth. They told the jury that Cherish was just 67 pounds, that she spent her final hours in terror, that her death was slow, violent, that this little girl had been taken from her mother, her sisters, and everything she knew to be safe, and that she died in the hands of a man who saw her as nothing more than an object. The state's first witness was Rain. She recounted the night, the dress, the dollar store, the hesitation, the van. The moment she said no, but followed anyway. She told the jury how Donald had offered to buy the dress for Cherish, how he got short with her when she paused at the door, how he told her she was safe, and she told them what it felt like to search aisle after aisle, realizing her daughter was gone. Rain said she had felt foolish for panicking too late. She convinced herself she was being paranoid. But by then, it was already over. Then came the hardest question of all. When your daughter followed the defendant toward McDonald's, was that the last time you ever saw her alive? Rain nodded. That image, Cherish skipping after the man who would take her life, was burned into her forever. But the defense wasn't silent. They pointed fingers at Rain's choices. They said she made the decision to get into that van. They painted her as careless, as irresponsible. They suggested that she, not just Donald, bore responsibility for what had happened. It was a brutal moment, one that cut deep. As the trial reached its most emotional point, the courtroom held its breath. Rain Periwinkle had testified. The prosecution had laid out their case. The evidence was overwhelming. But then, in a quiet moment that caught even his own attorney off guard, Donald Smith made an unexpected decision. He told his legal team not to cross-examine Rain. According to them, he said she'd been through enough. But for most, this wasn't compassion, it was calculation. Over the course of the trial, 12 witnesses took the stand. They included the officer who arrested Donald, the tipster who spotted his van, and a K-9 officer, the man whose gut reaction had led police to Cherish's body. He described walking through the brush, across tire tracks, past a fallen tree, and seeing Cherish's small body lying beneath, her hair floating just below the surface. The state also called the medical examiner who had performed Cherish's autopsy. She walked the jury through 26 heartbreaking photos. The injuries were too much. She had to pause her testimony. The courtroom broke for 10 minutes, but the horror stayed in the air. When she returned, she pointed to wounds, blunt force trauma to the scalp, strangulation injuries so severe they required careful dissection. Everyone in the room could feel it. Even the jury, visibly shaken, had to confront the inescapable truth. Donald's defense presented nothing in return. No witnesses, no closing argument. For many, it felt like a silent admission of guilt. Then the jury returned. After just 19 minutes of deliberation, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping of a victim under 13, and assault of a person under 12. They found the killing to be both premeditated and part of a felony act. Every box checked, every doubt erased. The next decision would weigh just as heavily: life in prison or the death penalty. During the sentencing phase, more testimony made it clear Donald Smith had always been dangerous. A woman named Carrie Ann took the stand. When she was just 13, he had tried to kidnap her. She remembered hiding in a closet, terrified he would find her, yelling vulgar threats through the door. She survived, but the trauma never left her. With the weight of the past and the brutality of the crime before them, the jury once again made their decision. They chose death. The judge confirmed it with finality. Donald James Smith, you have not only forfeited your right to live among us, you have forfeited your right to life at all. May God have mercy on your soul. For Rain, for Billy, it brought a sense of justice, but not peace. No sentence could ever return what had been taken. Rain stood outside the courthouse and said what many were feeling: that predators like Donald must never have the chance to do this again, that the system must change, that 21 days out of jail should never be enough time to find and murder a child. And still, not everyone believed in the punishment. Outside the courtroom, protesters gathered, anti-death penalty, activists holding signs and chanting. Jurors also spoke out. One said the images from the trial would never leave them. Another said that 4 jurors initially considered life imprisonment, but in the end, everyone agreed. Donald Smith didn't belong on this planet. And yet, the story didn't end there. In 2021, Donald filed an appeal. The Florida Supreme Court unanimously rejected it, saying the evidence of guilt was overwhelming. Then in 2023, nearly 10 years after Cherish's death, the case returned to court again. Donald's new legal team argued that his original attorneys were ineffective. They said the jury selection was flawed, that a potential juror might have been biased, that Donald should have been advised to take a plea. The court listened. They reviewed the claims, and in May 2024, the judge gave a final answer: no new trial. Donald Smith remained on death row. Cherish Periwinkle's case is one of the most devastating examples of what happens when predators fall through the cracks, and innocent children pay the price. Her name will not be forgotten. Her story must be told, and her light, though stolen, still shines.
Story number 4.
A dark Texas night, flames rising in the distance. What first looked like a small brush fire quickly turned into something far more disturbing. As firefighters battled the blaze, they stumbled upon a shocking discovery hidden within the smoke and embers: a human body. Nearby, a frantic white dog circled the scene, refusing to leave, as if trying to guard a terrible secret. From that moment on, nothing about this case would be simple, and as investigators began to piece it together, they uncovered a story of betrayal, deception, and violence that no one could have imagined. Mandy Rose Reynolds was born in 1996 in the U.S. state of Idaho. Her biological father's identity was never revealed, but her mother, Carla, was already raising an older son when Mandy came into the world. Eventually, Carla began a new relationship with a man who chose to embrace both children as his own. Together, they formed a household where love and stability were central. It was in that warm environment that Mandy grew up, feeling cared for and supported. From a young age, Mandy stood out for her generous spirit and lively personality. Friends and relatives described her as creative, kind-hearted, and always willing to help anyone who needed support. She carried herself with a spark of joy that made her presence comforting to others. By early 2023, another special bond had taken root in her life. She had adopted a dog, a white pup named Titan. For Mandy, Titan was not just a pet. He was a loyal friend who filled her days with joy, companionship, and a sense of security. He walked with her through quiet evenings, accompanied her on new adventures, and gave her comfort during challenging moments. That same year, Mandy made a big move. She left Idaho behind and relocated to Texas, eager to begin a new chapter. The change of scenery was filled with possibility, and she envisioned a future full of growth. Among her biggest dreams was starting college, something she looked forward to with determination and excitement. In every step of this transition, Titan remained by her side, inseparable from her daily life. Around February and March of 2023, Mandy reconnected with someone from her past. Out of the blue, she received a call from her cousin, Derek. He was only a couple of years older than she was and had been absent from her life for some time. Their conversation, at first casual, quickly led to a request. Derek asked if he could stay at her apartment for a while. True to her generous nature, Mandy agreed. She opened her doors without hesitation, not knowing that this simple act of kindness would bring consequences far darker than she could ever imagine. The events that followed reached a tragic turning point on the night of Wednesday, April 5th, 2023. Emergency services received a call about a fire. At first, it was reported as a minor blaze, possibly just some burning shrubs near a construction site. Firefighters and police were dispatched to investigate. As they worked to put out the flames, they stumbled upon something no one expected. Within the fire lay a body, badly burned and almost unrecognizable. What had started as a routine call now became a crime scene. The responders quickly called for reinforcements. fire investigators, paramedics, and additional police units. Their reports noted that the remains likely belonged to a woman, based on the strap of a bra still visible among the ashes. The night was stormy. Heavy rain and hail pounded the area, making the job even harder for first responders. Adding to the chaos, a frantic white dog circled the site, barking and howling relentlessly. The animal refused to leave, ignoring every attempt by officers to calm him down. Some wondered whether he was trying to scare them away or desperately leading them toward the heart of the tragedy. As the hours passed and the fire was finally extinguished, the body was carefully recovered and taken for examination. The identity remained unknown that night, but the loyal dog stayed near the scene. By the next day, a passerby spotted him again, still lingering in the same place, and contacted animal control. When the dog was scanned for a microchip, the answer emerged. His name was Titan, and he belonged to Mandy Reynolds. Authorities now had a critical lead. With suspicion that the body found in the fire might be Mandy herself, investigators immediately reached out to the phone number associated with Titan's registration. At first, their call went unanswered, but soon after, a woman returned the call, identifying herself as Mandy. The call had been passed on to the lead detective. Following the usual introductions, he asked the woman on the line to describe her pet and provide her address. She explained that her dog was a white mix between a poodle and a retriever, and that although she lived in San Marcos, the animal had slipped away while she was traveling. Her explanation, however, quickly became confusing. She spoke in fragments, referring vaguely to being on the road, visiting friends, and heading toward Wichita. None of it fit together cleanly. This raised the first red flags for the detective, who decided to keep her talking. He asked whether she was staying in Robinson. She denied it, insisting she was heading to Wichita. When pressed, she admitted she had made a stop at a rest area. Asked to repeat her name, she gave it as Mandy, the same as the registered owner of the dog. When questioned about where the microchip had been registered, she claimed she believed it had been entered under her fiancé's name, which was why they had chosen to call the dog Titan. She explained that both she and her fiancé had handled the registration together. By this point, inconsistencies in her story had the detective on alert. He continued questioning, hoping to clarify her movements. She grew impatient, pressing to know whether the dog had been placed in a shelter. The officer confirmed it was under custody, but stretched the exchange further to test her account. When asked again about her direction of travel, she claimed she was going toward Wichita to drop off the dog. The purpose, she said, was that her fiancé wanted to see his sick grandmother. Somewhere along the way, according to her, Titan had bolted from the car at a roadside stop. They had searched for hours, she insisted, but had been unable to find him. The detective asked for more precise details. Where exactly had this happened? The woman described it only as a rest area, similar to a truck stop. When pressed to describe the place, she could provide no further information. She said the incident had happened around 1 a.m. the previous night, though she was not completely certain. The questioning continued. The detective wanted to know what type of vehicle she had been driving in case police needed to coordinate for the dog's return. After hesitation, she finally said it was a silver Toyota Camry, a relatively new model. At that point, her impatience flared again. She interrupted, saying she was at work and only wanted her dog back. She apologized for any trouble and insisted she would come to collect him, though she mentioned the distance would be more than 120 miles. Still unsatisfied, the detective recapped the story, asking again for clarity. The woman reacted with irritation, questioning why she was being interrogated over something so simple. The The detective explained that he needed to confirm why this dog, allegedly hers, had been recovered under unusual circumstances. She reaffirmed her name as Mandy, and before hanging up, repeated that she would head to the shelter to collect the animal. Less than an hour later, the detective called her again. This time, his tone was softer, almost conciliatory. He told her that their first conversation might have started on the wrong foot. Then, he carefully explained the real reason for his insistence. The dog had not simply been found wandering by chance. He had been located near the scene of a fire. And at that scene, investigators had discovered a body. The detective, careful with his words, told the caller that he could not share every detail of the situation because the matter was highly sensitive. He hinted at the seriousness of what had been discovered. For a moment, there was silence on the line. Then, the woman let out an exclamation of surprise. She quickly added that she had been deeply worried about Titan, emphasizing how much money had been paid for the dog. She wanted to know how long he had been left outside. The officer explained that his questions were not random. He was trying to build a timeline of events. She apologized again, sounding shaken, and admitted she could not imagine what the dog might have gone through. That became the detective's opening to press further. He asked whether Titan had run off the night before, and she confirmed that he had. The detective pointed out that if that were true, the dog should have been discovered by morning. This detail confused her. In the end, she admitted she could not give an exact answer. During the call, the detective also noticed that the phone number she was using was not registered under her name. When asked about it, she admitted the line belonged to the grandfather of her fiancé. Pressed to provide the grandfather's name for verification, she grew evasive and finally snapped. She argued that the conversation made no sense at all. After all, her dog had simply escaped. Why was she being interrogated? The officer tried to explain that he was only seeking clarity, but her tone grew defensive. She accused him of being too insistent, even suggesting she was being treated like a criminal. The detective clarified that the timeline was crucial, since it might reveal whether the dog had interacted with the body found at the scene. The woman dismissed his explanation and demanded that he stop calling her. Before ending the exchange, the officer made it clear that Titan was in police custody and could not be released. She replied that her lawyer would handle the matter from then on. When the call ended, the detective's instincts told him he was right to be suspicious. The woman's story was inconsistent and her attitude far too defensive for the situation. Acting on that intuition, police contacted local authorities to carry out a welfare check at Mandy's residence. What they found only deepened the mystery. The home was empty. Mandy's belongings were gone, and her car had vanished as well. The questions multiplied. Who had really spoken on the phone? Was it Mandy or someone pretending to be her? And most importantly, was the burned body found at the fire scene connected to her disappearance? Investigators quickly moved to trace Mandy's vehicle using license plate databases. Their search revealed the car had been spotted in Wichita, more than 600 miles away. This triggered a focused hunt for the missing automobile. While that search was underway, forensic evidence provided the breakthrough. Dental records confirmed the worst fear. The remains found at the fire site were those of 26-year-old Mandy Reynolds. The autopsy revealed she had been shot in the head before her body was set on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. Investigators also determined that her remains had been placed inside a large plastic storage container where they recovered a spent shell casing. On April 7th, police discovered Mandy's personal belongings inside an abandoned truck left several miles from her home. The pieces were beginning to fit together, pointing toward a calculated crime rather than a tragic accident. On April 8th, the very next day, police in Wichita spotted the missing car. Officers attempted a traffic stop, but instead of complying, the driver suddenly accelerated, weaving recklessly through traffic at speeds exceeding 130 miles per hour. What followed was a chaotic 30-minute pursuit across busy streets. During the chase, the suspect rammed several patrol vehicles in a desperate bid to escape. Remarkably, no one was injured. Eventually, the car screeched to a halt and the driver bolted on foot, racing toward a crowded supermarket. Surveillance footage later captured the frantic scene as he pushed inside. Police armed with long rifles quickly set up a perimeter, warning bystanders to stay inside their cars. Inside the store, shoppers fled in panic as officers moved in. Seconds later, shouts echoed from one of the aisles. The fugitive had been discovered hiding beneath a shelf, stacked with canned goods. Officers ordered him out, then dragged him by the arms and placed him in handcuffs. The man was identified as Derek Daigneault. He was arrested on the spot, held on a $1 million bond, and placed in a Kansas jail while awaiting extradition to Texas for the murder of his cousin, Mandy Reynolds. In addition to the murder charge, Derek now faced 15 separate counts tied to the dangerous chase. Inside the abandoned vehicle, investigators found a firearm. Ballistics confirmed it matched the shell casing discovered in the plastic container where Mandy's body had been burned. For Mandy's mother, the discovery was devastating. She had already lost her daughter, and now the prime suspect was her own nephew. In a fundraiser post for funeral expenses, she expressed her belief that Derek had approached Mandy under false pretenses, manipulating her into letting him stay. It soon came to light that when Derek moved into Mandy's home, he had been out on parole for a felony. His record stretched back years, with violent incidents even during his teenage years, including an attack with a firearm. Evidence against him mounted when police uncovered surveillance footage from a store on the very day Mandy's body was found. Derek was seen purchasing a large plastic container identical to the one used in the crime, along with a shovel and a gas can. The footage even showed Titan in the car, his head poking out of the window. Investigators also suspected that Derek himself was the person who had called the police station pretending to be Mandy, though this was never officially confirmed. What was undeniable, however, was the forensic evidence. The bullet recovered from Mandy's body and the casing near the container both matched the gun in Derek's possession, a weapon registered to his grandmother. In January 2024, Derek pleaded guilty to a series of charges tied to the pursuit in Wichita: fleeing or attempting to elude an officer, aggravated assault, illegal possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and theft. 2 months later, a Kansas judge sentenced him to just over 9 years in prison for those crimes. Afterward, he was transferred to face trial in Texas for Mandy's murder. The trial began in early November 2024. For the jury, the media, and the community, it was an unsettling look into Derek's troubled past. The prosecution described him as extremely violent and a persistent danger to society. On November 7th, after less than an hour of deliberations, the jury returned with its verdict. Derek was guilty and sentenced to life in prison. In court, Mandy's mother, her stepfather, and her older brother delivered heart-wrenching victim impact statements. They spoke of their grief, their devastation, and the hole left in their lives. But as they spoke, Derek interrupted, hurling insults and even accusing his own cousin of being a criminal. Court officers quickly escorted him out, but tensions flared between the families, leading to a heated altercation inside the courthouse. Outside, as Derek was led back to jail, he seized the moment to speak to reporters. He insisted once more that his cousin had committed crimes, and when pressed about his own actions, he coldly admitted, without remorse, "I am a criminal." His attorney later thanked the jury for their work, but voiced deep disappointment with both the verdict and the sentence, announcing plans to appeal. For the district attorney's office, the outcome was a victory for justice. In a public statement, they highlighted two key factors that made the case: the unwavering loyalty of a heroic dog and the seamless cooperation of multiple law enforcement agencies across state lines. These combined efforts, they emphasized, brought justice for Mandy and protected the community from a dangerous offender. As for Titan, he found a safe new home with Mandy's best friend, who assured the press that the little dog was thriving. And yet, one haunting question remains: why? What could have driven Derek to betray and destroy the very cousin who had offered him kindness and shelter? The truth about his motives may never fully be known. Some secrets, it seems, remain buried, leaving behind a story marked not only by tragedy, but also by unanswered questions.
Story number 5.
It was the morning of August 25th, 2017. A big storm, Hurricane Harvey, was about to hit Texas. Crystal McDowell sent a quick message to her ex-husband asking if he had enough drinking water for the kids. Then, she got in her black Mercedes and drove toward his house. She had plans that day, showing a house, getting things done, but she never showed up. She never answered her phone, and she never came home. As the rain started to fall harder, Crystal seemed to disappear without a trace. It would take hidden cameras, a child's quiet secret, and a terrible discovery in the woods to finally reveal the truth. This is the real story of Crystal McDowell, and the moment everything changed. Crystal McDowell was born on October 26, 1979 in Baytown, Texas. Her early years were anything but easy. Raised by her parents, Pamela and Anthony, Crystal's childhood was marked by instability. Both struggled with addiction and were unable to provide a stable home. Tragically, by the age of 11, Crystal lost both parents to apparent overdoses within months of each other. Following their deaths, she was taken in by her grandmother and later also raised by her uncle Jeff Walters. Despite the hardships, Crystal was known for her radiant smile, striking blue eyes, and a personality that could light up any room. Driven, upbeat, and adventurous, Crystal became a flight attendant, a job that perfectly suited her spirit. For years she traveled the country, experiencing new places and people. At some point during her journey, Crystal met Stephen Wayne McDowell, a man 7 years her senior. Described as gentle and soft-spoken despite his imposing build, Stephen charmed Crystal. After dating for some time, they married in April 2007. Stephen had a daughter from a previous marriage. He worked as a shipping manager, but struggled to maintain steady employment. As a result, Crystal became the primary provider. While she thrived in her career, Stephen remained professionally unstable, creating a noticeable imbalance in the relationship. The couple welcomed 2 children together. Outwardly, their home life seemed harmonious. But behind closed doors, tension grew, particularly around Crystal's frequent travel. Stephen reportedly became increasingly jealous, suspecting her of affairs during her flights, though there was no evidence of infidelity. Friends noted that Crystal cherished her family deeply and prioritized stability, especially given her difficult upbringing. In 2016, Crystal made a life-changing decision. After 15 successful years as a flight attendant, she left the skies behind and joined her family's real estate business. This allowed her to spend more time with her children and provided a sense of permanence. Her uncle Jeff, proud of her decision, welcomed her as part of the third generation in their real estate legacy. Crystal excelled quickly in her new role. Her charm, professionalism, and dedication made her a rising star in the local housing market. However, privately, she confided in close friends that the career change also served a strategic purpose. She believed that being rooted locally would help her secure custody of her children if she and Stephen divorced. By February 2017, the marriage had reached a breaking point. Crystal filed for divorce, citing years of emotional strain. On March 20th, she called 911 to report that Stephen had made threats against her and their children. Authorities treated the situation as a precaution rather than a criminal matter. At that point, there were no custody agreements in place, meaning Stephen still had the legal right to be with his children. Officers tried to reach him, but their efforts were unsuccessful. A few days later, he returned the children, and Crystal decided not to press charges, choosing instead to focus on de-escalating tensions for the sake of their kids. Those close to Crystal say she was doing everything she could to ensure the divorce remained civil. Her goal was always the well-being of her children. Stephen's adult daughter was disturbed by the events and asked her father why he was acting out. He claimed to be enraged over alleged affairs Crystal had during their marriage, accusations that no one in her circle believed to be true. People familiar with the couple agreed the relationship had been toxic for years. Even Stephen's daughter admitted that while she and Crystal got along wonderfully, the marriage had always been volatile. Despite their differences, the divorce, finalized in June 2017, appeared amicable on the surface. In fact, Crystal helped Stephen find and purchase a new home while she worked on renovating her own. However, beneath the appearance of civility, deeper issues lingered. Crystal often asked her family not to mention her plans or outings to Stephen, fearing he would lash out. Even something as innocent as spending time with a friend could trigger him. Although legally divorced, Stephen seemed unable or unwilling to accept reality. His social media activity revealed a disturbing pattern. Shortly after the divorce, he changed his profile photo to an image of a tombstone, then to one of Santa Muerte, before switching back to a picture of him and Crystal. His posts painted the picture of a happy, intact family. Meanwhile, Crystal continued to support Stephen emotionally, checking in with him regularly. He assured her he was coming to terms with the separation and trying to get his life back on track. But his actions told a different story. One of Crystal's aunts noticed that Stephen frequently posted about bringing Crystal coffee in bed and pampering her, as if their relationship was still intact. In a final attempt to maintain a peaceful co-parenting relationship, Crystal planned a cruise with Stephen and the kids, but the closeness only blurred boundaries further. Then, in August 2017, something changed. Crystal, now 37, met Paul, a local jeweler and fellow single parent. Paul was charismatic, driven, and shared Crystal's love for travel and adventure. Their bond was instant, and for the first time in a long while, Crystal felt genuinely happy. Though she told her family about Paul, she asked them to keep it private until she found the right moment to share it with Stephen. Despite being legally divorced, she still feared his reaction. That fear didn't stop her from publicly expressing her joy. On August 23rd, she posted on social media that she had never been this happy and that her heart was full of a joy she never thought possible. "God is so good," she wrote. 2 days later, on August 25th, Hurricane Harvey loomed. Crystal woke up at Paul's house, preparing to face the storm and her responsibilities for the day. At 7:01 a.m., She texted Stephen to ask if he had stocked up on clean water for the kids and informed him she was heading to his house to shelter with them. She planned to visit a property afterward for a showing. Paul's security cameras captured the final known images of Crystal that morning, first in the kitchen, then walking outside in heels and holding her phone as she got into her black Mercedes-Benz. She was never seen again. Later that day, Crystal's uncle Jeff became concerned. They worked closely in the real estate business and spoke regularly. He tried calling her multiple times to inform her that the showing had been canceled due to the storm. When she didn't respond, Jeff reached out to Stephen, who replied with a suspicious text reportedly sent from Crystal's phone at 9:30 a.m. saying she planned to pick up the kids and head to Dallas. Jeff immediately grew suspicious. Crystal never changed plans without letting him know, and her phone was her lifeline. Work, appointments, everything was managed through it. Something didn't add up. Fearing the worst, he contacted the police to report her missing before noon that same day. On August 26th, as floodwaters from Hurricane Harvey swept through Houston, Jeff and two family members confronted Stephen. Stephen claimed Crystal hadn't been to his house for over a week, but his daughter told Jeff otherwise. She had hugged her mother the day before. That same day, a sheriff's deputy visited Stephen's home for a welfare check. When authorities entered Stephen McDowell's home, they found not only Crystal's black dress in the washing machine, but also her purse and handbag, clear signs she had recently been there. For her uncle Jeff, who had helped raise her, it was undeniable. Stephen was involved in her disappearance. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Hurricane Harvey had devastated the region. Many law enforcement officers, first responders, and even district officials were dealing with flooded homes and emergency rescues. As a result, the investigation stalled before it could even begin. Desperate for answers, Jeff turned to the media, hoping to raise awareness and generate leads. But his efforts were drowned out, literally, by round-the-clock storm coverage. With days passing and no progress, he hired a private investigator, frustrated by the silence from local authorities. This move sparked backlash. The local police chief and district attorney strongly objected to an outside investigator entering Crystal's home, arguing that critical evidence could be compromised or destroyed. Tensions between the McDowell family, law enforcement, and even local media in Houston escalated. Refusing to back down, Jeff and Crystal's new partner, Paul, teamed up to raise a $15,000 reward for any credible information. They launched a social media campaign that finally drew public attention. But in the eyes of investigators, suspicion fell not only on Stephen, but also on Jeff and Paul. Despite Jeff's relentless search for Crystal, law enforcement treated him with skepticism. Whispers about his private life, namely his same-sex relationships, circulated in the conservative town of Baytown. Some believed those biases colored the way authorities viewed his involvement. The local police commander even dismissed Jeff's concerns in a national broadcast, calling him overly emotional and an obstacle to the case. Paul Hargrave wasn't spared either. After submitting to a polygraph with inconclusive results, his credibility was questioned. He worsened things in the investigators' eyes by sending surveillance footage from his home to news stations instead of turning it over directly to law enforcement. Paul defended his actions, saying he tried to provide the videos to the sheriff's office but felt ignored, so he took his case to the public to clear his name. And then there was Stephen. Despite his emotionally manipulative behavior, threatening self-harm if Crystal ever left him, he was seen by investigators as polite, helpful, and cooperative. While family and friends described the marriage as deeply unhealthy and marked by control, authorities didn't view Stephen as a potential threat or a man seeking revenge over the divorce. That all began to change on Tuesday, August 29th. As the floodwaters receded, a family friend spotted Crystal's black Mercedes-Benz parked outside a rundown motel, an area flagged during the online campaign. The car doors were unlocked, and the keys sat in the console. Investigators believed it had been staged for theft, but due to the storm's impact, the flooded lot had made the car inaccessible. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses showed Crystal's car entering the motel lot at 6:37 a.m. on August 26, the day she vanished. Just 5 hours later, Stephen was seen on camera at a nearby gas station. He didn't buy gas. Instead, he drove toward the motel, seemingly checking to see if the car remained untouched. Even more chilling, other surveillance captured a hooded figure, matching Stephen's build, riding a bicycle through the rain near the motel that same morning. The clues were adding up, and for the first time, all eyes turned to Stephen, not as a grieving ex-husband, but as a potential suspect in a case that had stayed quiet for far too long. The investigation took a dramatic turn when surveillance footage from a Walmart located just across the highway from the motel where Crystal's car was found showed a man resembling Stephen McDowell purchasing a bicycle early on the morning of August 26, 2017. He paid in cash, and the timing aligned perfectly with the sighting of a hooded figure on a bike near the scene. Despite this damning evidence, Stephen denied any involvement in Crystal's disappearance. Authorities, citing a lack of direct proof, allowed him to return home with his children. Crystal's family was outraged. Jeff, her uncle, reminded the district attorney that Crystal had previously filed a report stating Stephen had threatened to harm their children if she ever left him. To Jeff, the man's mental and emotional instability was undeniable. It wasn't until September 8th, nearly 2 weeks after she vanished, that the district attorney finally intervened. The children were placed in protective custody, and Stephen was brought in for questioning. Yet even then, Stephen dictated the terms. He asked to return home for one final night, to put things in order, and promised to confess the next morning. Jeff and other loved ones were furious. They believed this unsupervised time could give Stephen an opportunity to take his own life and escape justice. But on September 9th, 2017, Stephen kept his word. He returned to the station and confessed. He told investigators that during a heated argument, Crystal informed him she was taking her new boyfriend, Paul, on an upcoming family trip, and not him. She had just returned from spending time with Paul, which enraged Stephen. As their children slept upstairs, he attacked her from behind and strangled her to death. After the murder, Stephen wrapped her body in a blanket, placed it in the trunk of his car, and before sunrise, drove to a wooded area near his home where he disposed of her remains. Even with the confession, Stephen refused to disclose the location of the body unless prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. Given the damage caused by Hurricane Harvey and the time that had passed, authorities feared the body would be impossible to locate without his help. They agreed to the deal. Later that day, Stephen led authorities to a remote, overgrown area. Crystal's remains were found in an advanced state of decomposition. Stephen McDowell, then 44, was charged with first-degree murder. Bail was set at $500,000, which he was unable to pay. Beyond the jealousy and rage, the case revealed a more sobering truth. Without Crystal, Stephen had no means of financial support for himself or his children. Justice, however, moved slowly. The trial didn't begin until June 2019. During that time, Stephen showed no remorse. In court, he attempted to portray himself as a broken man, claiming he acted in a sudden fit of passion, a legal strategy in Texas that, if accepted, could drastically reduce his sentence. He even alleged that Crystal's death resulted from a consensual encounter gone wrong, but the prosecution dismantled this narrative, emphasizing the long-standing emotional abuse and control he had exerted throughout their relationship. Stephen's legal team tried to smear Crystal's reputation, introducing unverified texts and claims of infidelity. But those closest to her stood firm. They painted a very different picture. Crystal was vibrant, caring, and deeply committed to her children. They testified about the dysfunction and manipulation she endured for years. One of the most heartbreaking moments during the trial came when Mandy Avalos, Crystal's lifelong friend and guardian of her children, took the stand and shared something devastating. In December 2017, Maui, then just 5 years old, confided in Mandy that she was ready to reveal her secret. Mandy had no idea what to expect. Gently encouraging the girl to speak, she listened in shock as Maui described waking up the morning her mother vanished. She recalled hearing her parents fighting. She wandered past the bathroom and into the bedroom. There, she saw Stephen push Crystal onto the bed and place his hands over her nose and mouth. Maui stood at the edge of the bed as her mother looked at her, until her eyes stopped moving. Then Stephen turned to his daughter, told her to go upstairs, and warned her never to speak about what she saw. Mandy immediately alerted authorities. Maui was placed into trauma counseling, but the emotional wounds ran deep. Another key witness for the prosecution was Melissa Cherry, Crystal's cousin and close friend. She recalled helping Crystal move out of the home when tensions with Stephen became unbearable, and then helping her move back in when Stephen threatened to end his life if she didn't return. Cherry testified that after the divorce, Stephen continued to manipulate Crystal emotionally, even starving himself to make her feel responsible for his well-being. The day after Crystal went missing, Melissa and Jeff visited Stephen's home. He was pacing nervously, trembling, and crying. Maui told them she had seen her mom the day before, then pointed to a black dress in a closet and said, "The bad spirits took her." The scene was chilling. Melissa and Jeff immediately called the police from outside the home, begging them to remove Stephen from the children's lives, but their pleas were ignored. Melissa also testified about the family cruise Stephen had proposed, a last-ditch effort to stage a peaceful goodbye. Crystal reluctantly agreed, but made it clear, no threats, no manipulation, no harm. As the trip neared, another argument, this time over money, convinced her to cancel. She realized Stephen wasn't trying to say goodbye. He wanted to win her back. Then came one of the most damning testimonies. An inmate who had shared a cell with Stephen revealed that Stephen had confessed in detail to killing Crystal. The motive? A text message from another man. The inmate recalled Stephen saying he used zip ties to bind Crystal's hands after she died, a detail only the forensic team had previously confirmed. Texas Department of Public Safety officials confirmed other pieces of Stephen's confession. He told them Crystal had arrived early on the morning of August 25, 2017. They fought. She told him she never truly loved him and that he needed to move on. In a rage, he strangled her in the bedroom. The 5-day trial ended swiftly. In just 3.5 hours, the jury found Stephen McDowell guilty of first-degree murder. On September 10, 2019, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. He must serve at least 25 before being eligible for parole, making his potential release date 2042. Crystal's family was devastated by what they saw as a lenient sentence. Her uncle Jeff shouted in court that Stephen deserved worse. Others were frustrated, believing a life sentence or the death penalty should have been on the table. but those options had been taken off due to the deal Stephen struck in exchange for revealing where he had hidden Crystal's body. The family's biggest concern, however, wasn't the length of the sentence, it was the emotional toll on the children. Despite being surrounded by love, Maui and Madden had suffered an unimaginable loss. Crystal had always centered her life around them, and now they were left navigating trauma most adults couldn't bear. By 2020, Mandy Avalos, who had taken in the children immediately after Crystal's murder, was taking steps to adopt them legally. Some sources describe Mandy as Crystal's childhood best friend, while others claimed they had once been romantic partners. Regardless of their past, Mandy remained Crystal's most trusted person, and her devotion to the children was unwavering. Now that you've heard the full story, we want to know your thoughts. Do you think Stephen McDowell received the justice he deserved? Share your opinion in the comments. We're reading them all.